Jeff Bezos' space company Blue Origin and a Colorado-based firm, Sierra Space, have been putting in a lot of work on the Orbital Reef project together. As part of a test program that's been going on for a while, the two companies behind the project recently blew up a prototype module for the station. Orbital Reef will be one of the private space stations to replace the International Space Station. It will contain a restaurant, a space hotel, and places for enterprises and scientists to do research. The hypersonic space plane that will take people to and from the so-called Space Business Park once it's in orbit, which is projected to happen around the year 2027, will be dubbed Dream Chaser. Plans with Dream Chaser. Sierra Space is constructing Dream Chaser as part of its plans to become the biggest real estate developer in space and compete with Blue Origin. In a recent interview with Rob Report, Tom Weiss, the CEO of Sierra Space, said that we're about to enter the orbital age. This change is kind of like the start of the information age or the Industrial Revolution. Weiss said, "We need to get good at building commercial economies in low Earth orbit before we can start. After that, we'll go to the surface of the moon, which is 250,000 miles distant, until we figure out how to survive on a planet that's 35 million miles away." Dream Chaser is one of the things that Sierra Space is doing to help this cause. The first manned mission for Dream Chaser is expected to happen sometime in 2026. The supersonic space plane will be able to be used around 15 times, and it will be able to carry 12 people and about 5,440 kilograms of cargo. As part of a $3 billion arrangement with NASA, the Dream Chaser will not only take products and people to the International Space Station, but it will also eventually take passengers to Orbital Reef. This arrangement is part of a bigger push by NASA to become less dependent on SpaceX, which is the only U.S. business that can take astronauts to the International Space Station right now. Dream Chaser's big inflatable space house will be one of its best parts. Dream Chaser will be much smaller than the NASA Space Shuttle, which is 100 feet long. It'll have a total length of 30 feet. On the other side, it has a feature called LIFE, which stands for Large Integrated Flexible Environment, and it lets it set up a large habitat in space once it's in orbit. The inflatable habitat can get as big as 27 feet across, which is about the same as the height of a 30-story building. It's made of a soft material so it can stop tiny meteorites and other space debris. Because the space plane is small, it can do something important that would not be possible otherwise. It can land in a horizontal position on any runway that can handle a Boeing 747 or an Airbus A380. Sierra Space is building a network of spaceports for Dream Chaser. This network will include Spaceport America in New Mexico, as well as facilities in Cornwall, England, and Oita, Japan. The end goal is for Dream Chaser to land on commercial runways at international airports, but Sierra Space is working toward this goal in the meanwhile. When it's completely working, Dream Chaser will be able to get to Orbital Reef, which is in low orbit, in around 3 days. Ars Technica says that Sierra Space Dream Chaser won't get to the International Space Station for the first time before December. This is 5 months later than it was supposed to be out in August. At the end of each mission, the shuttle-shaped Dream Chaser will be sent into orbit by a rocket called Vulcan. Vulcan was made by United Launch Alliance and looks like a shuttle. Vulcan is designed to land on a normal runway. Sierra Space said in the report that it plans to launch in the fourth quarter of this year, but it didn't say why the launch is being pushed back. On March 24th, a United Launch Alliance spokesperson told Ars Technica, "We'll be as flexible as we can be until Sierra Space is ready to fly." The spokesman went on to warn that a mass simulator might be used instead of the spacecraft's planned certification flight. On the other side, Vulcan is having its own challenges with its development before it does the 2 certification flight. Before Dream Chaser is set to take off, Astrobotic's lunar lander will go on a CERT-1 trip in May. But recently, something strange happened while testing on the upper level of the Vulcan. Tony Bruno, the CEO of United Launch Alliance, said on Twitter the day before yesterday, March 29, that there was a problem with the Centaur 5 upper stage during qualification testing the day before that. He also answered questions in a thread on Twitter. Bruno said that testing at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center did not hurt anyone, and he called it extreme structural load testing of various worst-case scenarios. He went on to explain that the group doesn't know enough about what happened on the first day of the investigation to make any inferences. When asked if it will change launch dates, he only said that all other preparations are still going on. In answer to the inquiry, this is what I said. Because of this, before we take off, we test everything possible on the ground in a thorough and meticulous way. There's an investigation going on. He stressed that once Vulcan is ready, it would be able to fly. Before going on to operational flights, ULA wants to fly 2 certification missions. This is especially important for the U.S. military, which needs a high level of flight reliability for its security payloads. Before moving on to operational operations, ULA wishes to fly these certification missions. Because of the issue, NASA will only have one type of rocket that's working and can send cargo vehicles into space for the time being. The SpaceX Falcon 9 is the name of that rocket. The same rocket puts both the Dragon spacecraft made by SpaceX and the Cygnus spacecraft made by Northrop Grumman into orbit. Russian Progress spacecraft also supply the International Space Station, but mostly for the needs of the Russian crew or to transport fuel. NASA utilizes its commercial cargo for the experiments, equipment, and supplies that are needed for the U.S. section. Cygnus used to be able to go into space on the Antares 230 rocket, but that setup is no longer possible. Antares was powered by Russian engines. However, those engines are no longer available because Russia initiated a war with Ukraine in February 2022 that was highly condemned around the world. As a result, most space connections with Russia were cut off, with the International Space Station being the only one that stayed open. Around the year 2025, if the Antares 330 rocket is ready to launch by then, Cygnus plans to replace its present Russian engines with engines made by Firefly Aerospace. In the past few months, the U.S. military has struck up a number of agreements that will help them meet its future point-to-point transportation needs. These partnerships include a cooperative research and development agreement with Rocket Lab to use its Electron booster and a $102 million contract with SpaceX via the U.S. Air Force for rocket delivery of military cargo and aid supplies. With the use of CRADAs, federal agencies can make agreements with private organizations that aren't supported by the government. At the same time, the government can continue to offer help in the form of facilities, equipment, expertise, and other services. Sierra Space said that the cooperation will allow the company to build logistics supplies that may be used to cope with new and fast-moving threats in contested and changing environments, or to help areas that need humanitarian aid. The Dream Chaser spacecraft has gone on a series of successful test flights as Sierra Space works toward its aim of transporting freight for a variety of consumers, including NASA, with which it has an agreement for resupply missions to the International Space Station. The U.S. Air Force said in October 2020 that the U.S. military has been talking about the feasibility of high-speed space delivery for at least the previous 3 years. In this conversation, we've spoken about how to get around important boundaries, including weight, volume, and restrictions on launch operations and recovery. Officials from the USAF said at the time, as the industry moves forward to solve these problems and speed up launches to cut costs, space transportation becomes an attractive option because it can get important cargo to its target quickly from a long way away. Thank you so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for more.